The neighborhood on Lancaster Boulevard was quiet that night. Streetlights flickered over parked cars, and the soft hum of a distant highway was the only sound breaking the stillness. Inside one small apartment, however, something terrible was unfolding. A light stayed on long after midnight. Neighbors would later recall faint noises, a thud, maybe a muffled cry, then silence. Hours later, a figure emerged, dragging something heavy into the night. He moved quickly, methodically, as if following a plan long rehearsed. By sunrise, the apartment that once held the laughter of three young children stood eerily still. The curtains were drawn, the front door locked, and the woman who had fought for years to protect herself and her sons was nowhere to be found. What happened inside that home in the early hours of August 10th would soon unravel into one of Lancaster's most haunting cases. When Shayla Elizabeth Cabrera left Peru, she carried the same hope shared by millions who begin a new life far from home. The hope of safety, stability, and opportunity. She wanted to give her children everything she never had. The move to the United States was not just a change of country, it was a leap of faith. She arrived with dreams, courage, and a mother's determination to build a future from the ground up. At 33 years old, Shayla had already achieved much of what she once envisioned. In Lancaster, California, she was known as a loving mother to three young boys, ages 9, 6, and 4, and a woman who worked tirelessly to provide for them. Friends and neighbors often spoke about her warmth and generosity. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, brought food to others when they were struggling, and still managed to smile through her own challenges. Those close to her described Shayla as a devoted mother and a loyal friend. She took pride in small details, preparing homemade Peruvian meals for her children, helping them with schoolwork, and decorating their modest apartment on Lancaster Boulevard with photos, drawings, and colorful touches that made it feel like home. Despite her limited means, she created a space filled with laughter and love. But behind that sense of calm and normalcy, something darker was happening. Josimar Cabrera, her husband, seemed like a caring partner from the outside. He smiled in public, played the role of a father, and gave the impression of a stable family man. Yet, behind closed doors, life was very different. Even before moving to the United States, Shayla had already filed a report in Peru accusing him of abuse. According to her mother, who still lived in Lima, Josimar had hit her, mistreated her, and even struck their youngest child. Those who knew about it feared for her, but Shayla kept much of her pain hidden. Like many women in her situation, she hoped things might change once they started a new life abroad. Unfortunately, the violence didn't stop. It simply followed her to California. Friends began noticing changes in Shayla. Her cheerful energy started to fade, replaced by quiet exhaustion. She still smiled, still helped others, but her eyes seemed more distant. Elizabeth Rousseau, one of her closest friends, later told investigators that Shayla felt trapped. Josimar had threatened to take the children away if she left him, a fear that kept her bound to him for years. Even in the midst of that fear, Shayla's heart remained kind. She helped her neighbors with small tasks, shared stories about her childhood in Peru, and spoke about the dreams she had for her sons. She wanted them to grow up in peace, surrounded by love, to study, to travel, to live freely. It was that vision that kept her going, even as the walls of her marriage closed in around her. By the summer of 2025, Shayla had made up her mind. The years of abuse had worn her down, and she could no longer live in fear. She began to plan her escape carefully, saving money, talking quietly with friends she trusted, and preparing to file for divorce. She also planned to report Josimar to the authorities in Lancaster, determined to protect her boys once and for all. On August 9th, she called her parents in Peru and told them everything. She said she was ready to leave and was going to the police. Her voice carried both fear and hope. Fear of what might happen if he found out, and hope that she could finally start over. Her mother remembered that call vividly. It would be the last time she ever heard her daughter's voice. Inside their apartment, the tension was growing. Josimar knew what was coming. To him, the idea of losing control was unbearable. Friends later said that he seemed distant and angry in the days before Shayla disappeared. What Shayla didn't know was that he had already made up his mind. If he couldn't keep her under his control, he would make sure no one else could. That night, everything changed. August 9th, 2025, would be the last day anyone saw Shayla Cabrera alive. In the early hours of August 10th, while her children slept nearby, something horrific unfolded inside their Lancaster apartment. The details remain sealed in court documents, but what investigators later pieced together paints a chilling picture of deliberate violence. Prosecutors allege that Josimar Cabrera murdered his wife inside the home they shared with their 3 sons. The case filed by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office included a special circumstances allegation. A knife was used in the attack. This was not a sudden argument or a moment of rage. It was cold. It was calculated. It was final. By morning, the small apartment that had once been full of laughter had fallen silent. The children awoke in a world that would never be the same, and a community that had admired Shayla for her strength and kindness would soon be mourning the woman who had spent her final days fighting for freedom. Inside the small apartment on Lancaster Boulevard, 3 young boys slept peacefully in their beds, unaware that the world around them was collapsing. They didn't hear the struggle. They didn't see the violence. In another room, their father, the man who had once promised to protect them, was taking their mother's life. The walls of that apartment, once filled with laughter and bedtime stories, now held only silence and the echo of unthinkable cruelty. When the act was over, Josimar Cabrera faced what came next. The man who had spent years controlling his wife through fear now turned to controlling what would happen to her body. Investigators later said that what followed was not chaos, but a disturbing display of order. He wrapped Shayla's body in a large piece of fabric, folding it tightly and securing it to conceal any trace of what he had done. That same material would later become a key piece of evidence, matching exactly what was seen in the surveillance footage that broke the case open. He moved deliberately, not like someone panicking after a sudden act of violence, but like a man following a plan. Neighbors would later recall hearing faint noises during the early morning hour, doors closing, something being dragged, then the sound of a car starting. In the quiet of that neighborhood, the smallest sound carried through the still air. Around 2:40 a.m., a neighbor returning home from a night shift noticed something odd. The complex was silent, the parking lot dimly lit, but one man was awake, Josimar, cleaning the trunk of his silver sedan. She paused, confused. At that hour, there was no reason for anyone to be outside doing that. What she didn't realize was that she was witnessing the beginning of a cover-up. Investigators would later confirm that she had unknowingly seen a man preparing to hide the body of his wife. The defining moment came hours later when detectives recovered footage from a nearby Ring doorbell camera. In the grainy black and white video, time-stamped 4 a.m., a figure could be seen dragging a large, heavy object wrapped in fabric across the pavement. The effort in his movements, the way he struggled to lift it, it was unmistakable. That object was Shayla Cabrera. The footage would later become the centerpiece of the homicide investigation. Cold, irrefutable proof of the final betrayal. Moments later, the man lifted the bundle and forced it into the trunk of the car. He closed the lid, walked around to the driver's side, and drove away into the night. His route would take him out of Lancaster and into the dark, winding roads leading toward the Angeles National Forest, a vast stretch of wilderness that covers more than 700,000 acres of rugged canyons and cliffs. During the day, it is a place of quiet beauty, but under the cover of darkness, it has often been used as a dumping ground for violent crimes. The isolation, the steep drop-offs, the endless terrain, it was the perfect place to make someone disappear. Josimar drove deep into the forest, navigating through sharp turns and narrow roads until he found a spot hidden from view. There, in the cold early morning air, he opened the trunk and pulled out the bundle. The forest was silent. No headlights passed. No one saw what he did next. He dragged Shayla's body to the edge of a steep embankment and pushed it over. Her body tumbled down among the rocks and brush, coming to rest in the darkness below. The woman who had once shared his home, his meals, his life, the mother of his 3 children, was abandoned like a discarded object. When it was done, Josimar got back in the car and drove home. Inside the apartment, the boys were still asleep, unaware that their mother would never return. By morning, he began to prepare his next act, the lies. 2 days later, on August 12, 2025, Shayla's friends grew desperate. They had not heard from her since August 9th. No calls, no messages, no social media activity, nothing. That silence was unlike her. She was always in touch, especially when it came to her children. She would never disappear without telling someone. Worried, her friends went to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to file a missing person report. Deputies were sent to the Cabrera apartment. Josimar answered the door. He appeared calm, polite, even helpful at first. But as detectives began asking questions, his stories began to shift. At first, he claimed that Shayla had been detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It was a calculated lie, one that preyed on the fear and confusion surrounding immigration issues. He likely believed it would discourage immediate investigation, as such cases often involve complex bureaucracy and delayed communication. When detectives asked for details, he changed his story. Now, he said, Shayla had left him for another man. Later, in a third version, he claimed she had been involved in an accident, but offered no specifics, no witnesses, no report, no location. Each story contradicted the last. Every new explanation fell apart under even the simplest questioning. Detectives soon realized they weren't speaking to a worried husband. They were speaking to a man trying to hide what he had done. As investigators began to piece things together, friends of Shayla Cabrera came forward with critical information. They spoke about the years of domestic violence, the countless times she had asked for help, and the fear she lived with daily. They told detectives about her plan to leave her husband and the threats he had made to take the children if she ever tried. The image of a devoted family man that Josimar projected was crumbling. With his story shifting and the friends' testimonies revealing a history of abuse, investigators understood that this was no longer a simple missing person case. This was a murder investigation in disguise. Detectives began going through every possible clue. They checked phone records, traffic cameras, and security systems in the area around the Lancaster apartment complex. Then, on August 13th, just 3 days after Shayla vanished, came the turning point. A neighbor's Ring doorbell camera had captured footage from the early morning hours of August 10th. The video showed Josimar dragging a large object wrapped in fabric across the ground and out of the complex. He struggled with the weight of it before loading it into the trunk of his car. That short clip changed everything. What had begun as a missing person report instantly became a homicide investigation. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Homicide Bureau took charge immediately. Detectives coordinated with specialized search and rescue teams from Crescenta Valley, Altadena, and Montrose. Their task was enormous: to search through over 700,000 acres of the Angeles National Forest, a vast landscape of steep canyons, cliffs, and dense brush. Finding a body there was like looking for a single grain of sand in a desert, but they knew they had to try. Meanwhile, new information made the case even more urgent. Josimar and the couple's 3 young children were now missing as well. Working with both the Mexican and Peruvian consulates, U.S. authorities issued international alerts, fearing he had already fled the country. Leads suggested that he was making his way towards South America. Then, on the morning of August 16th, just after 10 a.m., the radio call every investigator both hopes for and dreads came in. Members of the Montrose Mountain Search and Rescue Team had spotted something down a steep embankment in a remote part of the Angeles National Forest. A bundle of fabric that looked eerily familiar. When homicide detectives arrived, they climbed down to the area. Among the rocks and brush, wrapped in the same kind of material seen in the video, they found the body of 33-year-old Shayla Cabrera. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The discovery confirmed what many had feared. The object seen on the surveillance footage was indeed her body. The news spread quickly through Lancaster's Peruvian community. Candlelight vigils began forming almost immediately. People brought flowers, photos, and handwritten notes remembering the woman who had come to the United States chasing a dream of safety and a better life for her children. Instead, she had met a violent end at the hands of the man she trusted most. That same day, investigators received word from Peru. The 3 Cabrera children had been located safe and taken into protective custody. They were alive, but their mother was gone, and their father was now an international fugitive. That evening, dozens of people gathered outside Lancaster City Hall. Some held candles, others held signs reading "Justice for Shayla" and "Not one more." The community stood together in grief, their faces lit by candlelight as they mourned the loss of a mother, a friend, and a neighbor who had given so much of herself to others. Meanwhile, across the continent, Josimar Cabrera was already thousands of miles away. Hiding in Peru, moving through cities, and trying to stay one step ahead of the law. But investigators were closing in. The same technology, persistence, and cooperation that had revealed his crime would soon bring him face to face with justice. After fleeing the United States, Josimar crossed international borders in a desperate attempt to escape capture. He was detained not once, but twice, first in Mexico and later in Peru, both times traveling by land, trying to stay ahead of the authorities. Despite being questioned, he was released each time. At that point, U.S. prosecutors had not yet filed formal charges, meaning foreign governments had no legal reason to hold him. It was a frustrating delay for investigators who already knew he was responsible for Shayla's murder. When Josimar finally arrived at the Jorge Chavez International Airport in Lima, Peru, local authorities were waiting. He was stopped, questioned, and the 3 young children who had traveled with him were taken into protective custody. Still, without a formal extradition order or filed U.S. charges, Peruvian police had no authority to detain him. The man suspected of killing his wife was free to walk away, while his children were handed over to child welfare officials. Over the next few days, the case gained attention in both the United States and Peru. Shayla's story spread across social media and news outlets, with many questioning how her killer could walk free while her family grieved. The Peruvian Foreign Ministry, working in coordination with U.S. consular officials, quickly stepped in to ensure the children's safety. Within days, the 3 boys were flown out of Lima, connecting through Mexico City, and repatriated to Los Angeles, where they were reunited with their maternal grandmother, Helga Rosilo. For Helga, it was a heartbreaking reunion. Her grandsons were safe, but her daughter was gone forever. Meanwhile, on the other side of the continent, prosecutors in Los Angeles County were moving at full speed. Detectives from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Homicide Bureau compiled hundreds of pages of evidence: the surveillance video, witness statements, forensic findings from the apartment, and Shayla's history of domestic violence reports. On August 21st, that case file was presented to the district attorney's office for formal review. Later that day, the district attorney's team announced they were charging Josimar with 1 count of murder, including a special allegation that he had used a knife as a deadly weapon. The following morning, an extradition arrest warrant was issued, and Interpol was officially notified. A red notice, essentially an international wanted alert, was distributed across the world, identifying Josimar as a fugitive accused of homicide. The case became a top priority for both the U.S. Department of Justice and Peruvian National Police. Reports from Peru described an intense manhunt, agents tracking movements along the Pan American Highway, checking hotels and transportation hubs, and coordinating closely with Interpol offices in Mexico and the United States. For nearly 2 weeks, Josimar remained on the run, but with the red notice active, every move he made became riskier. His face was circulating across international databases, border alerts, and media coverage in both countries. Investigators believe the growing pressure left him with few options. Finally, on August 27, 2025, Josimar surrendered himself to authorities. He walked into Interpol headquarters in Lima and turned himself in. Peruvian National Police released footage showing the moment of his arrest: Josimar standing handcuffed, dressed in a black shirt marked with the Interpol insignia, flanked by officers on each side. His expression was blank, his head lowered, as cameras flashed and officers led him away. According to Peruvian officials, he will remain in custody in Lima while the extradition process moves forward. These procedures often take several months, involving diplomatic coordination and court hearings to ensure compliance with international law. Once approved, he will be transported back to California, where he will face trial for the murder of Shayla Cabrera. If convicted, Josimar Cabrera faces a maximum sentence of 26 years to life in prison. For Shayla's family, the long wait for justice is far from over. But after months of fear, searching, and heartbreak, there is finally hope that the man who destroyed her life will be held accountable. Justice for Shayla Elizabeth Cabrera has begun its long journey home. A journey fueled by the love of a mother who came to America seeking peace, and by a community that refuses to let her story be forgotten. Thanks for